Meeting a Earth Dragon. When our laughter ceased, I then looked at him with full seriousness. So have you thought over what I proposed? Kid, you're insane, you know that. The old man said to me with a sigh. To think that you plan on using the demon of the mist as materials. Well, what do you think? Can you work with it? The old man just leaned back and thought for a few seconds before looking at me with a toothy grin. Well, I can, but do you have the money for it? Sighing helplessly at this old monk's greed, I look towards Wilhelm. Seeing my gaze, he steps forward and starts to speak. Subaru here will get both a piece of the white whale's corpse and money for the information he provided after the battle is complete. After that, he gives me a nod before stepping back into his previous position. I then turn my gaze back to the old man. I will also send the parts and coins to you after the battle. We can also go over what I want you to do with all those materials right now if you would like. Are these terms to your liking, old man? He then gives me a nod before slightly frowning. Yes, I can definitely work with all these terms. But you should really start calling me by my name. I just give him a blank look. Are you going senile? You never even told me your name. Hearing me, his face also turns blank for a few seconds before changing into an awkward smile. Well, this old man's name is Andre. He then stuck out his hand. What is yours? Nitsuki Subaru, it's going to be a pleasure working with you, Andre. I also stuck my hand out and shook his. Releasing my grasp, I then reached into my front pocket before bringing out some rolled up papers. Unrolling them, it shows 3 different sets of armor on one page. And on the others, it shows different types of weapons and contraptions. Now, it's time to discuss what I want done. When we finished the conversation about the armor, I was told that it would take 2 months to complete all of it. I was extremely disappointed when I heard this, but I can understand why. The different designs I showcased are custom tailored for my needs. It's not perfect, of course, so Andre promised to improve upon them as compensation for the time. Now I'm in a carriage, Wilhelm is sitting in front and Rem is currently laying on my shoulder with a peaceful smile asleep. Seeing her like that, I smiled a bit before going back into my head. As a compensation for the time, Andre decided to give me a new sword and 2 sheaths for my throwing knives. I can put these sheaths on both of my forearms and fit about 10 knives total in my sleeves. Looking out of the carriage window, I see the outline of the huge tree in the horizon and the little dots which I presume to be the weapons being set up by the merchants and mages. At the rate this carriage is traveling, we should arrive in about 10 minutes. So I poked Rem softly on her cheek to wake her up. Are we there? She groggily said aloud as she raised her arms and gave her back a good stretch. No, but we will be there in a little bit. But no sleeping anymore, I need you to be fully awake for when we met the rest of our friends. She then throws me a small smile before putting her hand on my shoulder. I know a method that can wake me up quickly. Okay. I said while looking at her flatly. Then use it please, we don't have tea. Not allowing me to finish, she quickly wrapped her arms around my neck before giving me a long kiss to shut me up. She then pulled back before giggling a bit and showed a face full of energy. Alright, all recharged now. Amused by her teasing, I just gave her a small smile before leaning in and gave a peck on her cheek. I love you, Rem. Rem, hearing my words, looks over at me with a bright smile. I know you do, silly Subaru. We then spent a few more minutes teasing and talking with each other before the carriage stopped. Wilhelm's calm voice then came from the front of the carriage. We are here. Hearing him, I grasped a hold of Rem's hand before opening the door on my side. Stepping out, I am greeted by the blazing light of the sun and green grass that spans for as far as I can see. There is also the ridiculously large tree that could be compared to a modern-day skyscraper. But I don't pay attention to that, I for once actually take a step back and admire the beauty this world can bring me as I look at the flower patches surrounding me and Rem. To my left is the many mages and warriors working tirelessly with the merchants to set up our weapons, with Crush beautifully leading them all in a somehow orderly fashion. But I then notice the weremounts are lined up and start walking over with Rem. Wilhelm will go and fill Crush in on our arrival. Stopping in front of them, I scan them with a gaze. My gaze then landed on a certain earth dragon. Walking over to her, I don't immediately look into her eyes. I instead admire the dark scales running along her body. She is about the size of a horse and is standing on 2 legs. Her legs are long and slim. But I know that they carry serious speed. I then raised my eyes and met with hers. And when they met, I also felt her gaze trying to peer into me as well. Her orange eyes carried a strong hint of childlike curiosity and intelligence. Sticking my hand out slowly, I stop it in front of her nose. I am openly expressing that I wish to trust her and also wish for her to trust me. Looking into my eyes, she apparently saw the intention I was planning on expressing before sniffing my hand. She then looked up at me again before leaning her head down. Seeing this, I smile before petting her scaly head. It's a pleasure to meet you, girl. Feeling my hand on her head, she gave almost a cat-like purr of pleasure. Oh. It seems she took a liking to you. A man said from behind me. And she's an earth dragon at that too. Turning around, I see what could be compared to as a werewolf standing in front of me. But I only give him a glance before turning back to the purring dragon. I'm just lucky, she fortunately read my intentions properly and merely decided to accept them. Haha, that just makes you sound even more impressive, bro. I then gave her one last pat on her head before turning towards him. Say, you're the leader of Iron Fang, right? Wasn't it, Ricardo? He then gave me a toothy grin before patting my shoulder. Yep, I'm Ricardo, dude. And I do lead the Fang of Iron, or as your boys call it, Iron Fang. He then points his finger towards the ground dragon I was just speaking to. Anyways, dude, she was brought in by your guys also. I'll make sure that Lady Crush allows you to ride her for this battle. Speaking of Crush, I think she was looking for you earlier, dude. He then threw me one last grin before walking over to his mercenary group. I turned back to the dragon before throwing one last set of words at her before making my way towards Crush. I'm going to call you Patrash. She was an extremely trustworthy person. I named you after her in hopes of sharing the same trust I once did with her. In response to her new name, I could hear her happily roar. Hearing her, I smiled a bit before looking over at Rem. She seemed to be staring at Patrash a bit too much. Something the matter, Rem? She then snapped her gaze away before looking at me with an unsettling smile. Nothing, just admiring her scales. 12 comments, 0 vote. Brace yourselves. Sitting on Patrash with Rem, I look at my phone which shows that we have 5 minutes until the presumed appearance. Looking at everyone around me, I can feel a heavy and overbearing aura of tension coming from the Fang of Iron and younger knights under Crush's house. In stark contrast, Wilhelm and the old veterans remain vigilant and grow increasingly more eager as time moves on. The mages who were originally loud and arrogant are now quiet and tuned down. At least they know the time to brag about their magic and when to be serious. All our weapons have successfully been set and are waiting for their time to shine. Those babies are going to be our main go-to for this battle and must be protected. I then look down at my phone and see that there is only 30 seconds left. I then start to feel extreme anxiety before myself calming down and turning towards Crush. It's almost time. She then turns towards me and nods before gaining a strict vigilance. The phone's alarm starts playing. Everyone. Crush then yells out as the alarm goes off. Get ready to engage stage 1. Hearing her, many of the younger guys freeze up and start looking around for the beast. The veterans, however, look around with a fever as if a fine wine has permeated the air with its smell. Maaaaaaaaoo. Hearing the animalistic moan, everyone's gazes shoot towards the sky. I've already filled them in on its ability to fly and told them to keep an eye out for the sky. In front of the moon, we see a giant beast in the shape of whale staring down on us. It has a pink ring on its back and its eyes shine with an almost blood red. Raagggghhhhh. Rog. Upon seeing it, all the veterans start to scream with a vigor. The younger ones, however, scream at a much lower volume. The mages immediately pour some mana into a motor-like object which immediately sends a ball of light into the night sky. Seeing it, everyone throws a hand over their face. Rem also covers my eyes with one of her hands before also closing hers. After that, a loud shing rang out as was immediately followed by an almost aggravated moan of pain. Regaining my sight, I see that the light had landed right in front of the whale's face and had went off directly in front of it. Still in pain, the whale repeatedly let out cries of anguish and rage as it threw itself about wildly in the air before diving straight down. It's time to weaken the demon. Crush then yelled as she sliced in front of her. Slice. Roar. Somehow getting hit, the whale cried out in pain as it threw itself towards the direction it felt the attack come from. The mages then gathered around a single weapon before slowly starting to direct their mana into it. It's finally time. Wilhelms yelled out as his mount went shooting towards the beast. Today is the day you repay me. Haha. Let's party, dudes. Ricardo yelled with vigor and excitement as his mount brought him flashing forward with two twins following his charge. Wilhelm, who was the first to get close, leapt up 100 meters in the air before landing gracefully on the beast. Strengthening my optical nerves and eyes with magic, I saw him then bring up his sword before stabbing deep into the beast's skin. He then started running while dragging his sword behind him with an inhuman roar. Blood then shot out from the massive trail he left behind, and the whale visibly shook from pain. Feeling the tremors under his feet, he brought his sword out forcefully, causing a geyser of blood to shoot out. He then looked up at the ring above him and leapt before slicing it with his full strength. However, he only got halfway through before being forcefully rebounded by an unknown force. Now falling, I see him spread his arms out and whisper something before grasping his sword tightly and spinning himself to face the beast. Take this. And with a mighty yell he grasped his sword with both hands and brought it above his head. He then flashed down at an insane speed, causing him to blur before bringing his sword vertically down the whale's side. However, no visible cut was shown in the whale, much to everyone's shock. But I then saw him throw the whale a smug grin as it tried to find him with its still blinded eyes. It looked in a random direction with amusement. Shing! A massive blue light shone where he cut before a massive red line slowly appeared on its side. The red line then slowly got darker and darker before reaching a deep crimson. Before all of a sudden flashing into an extremely bright light red and shooting out a massive line of blood reaching a length of 30 meters. Wilhelm then calmly landed on his mount and rode around to the other side of the beast as Ricardo took over his side. Yahoo! Yelling with excitement, he jumped up and grabbed his huge sword and swung his sword at one of the whale's fins and made a clean cut through it. And while the whale squirmed in pain, he jumped onto its back and started to slice and dice everywhere on its back, causing the white back to show a large patch of crimson red. As he sliced and diced repeatedly, he let out an almost crazy laugh as he jumped up and sliced in the same spot Wilhelm did. He only got a quarter of it before being rebounded. And with the silence provided by the shell-shocked warriors, an audible tisk of disappointment could be heard across the battlefield. And as he turned around to face the beast below him, he then let out an insane laugh. My turn, bro. He then took the same stance as Wilhelm did before him before slicing in the same spot, causing it to now shoot out blood at a constant rate. And as he landed, Wilhelm left his mount and repeated his same actions. However, the whale suddenly regained its sight and locked its gaze onto the human on its back. It then started to spin its body in an attempt to get Wilhelm off. But Wilhelm in response merely grimes before sticking his sword in its back and running the direction it spun. This caused a massive slice to surround the whale's body in a full 360 degrees. And every time the whale spun, it would get deeper and deeper and shoot out more of its precious blood. Noticing its predicament, the whale then stopped spinning and let out a moan of annoyance before noticing me and the other soldiers silently watching. Both annoyed and enraged, the whale locked onto me before suddenly stopping. Noticing this, Wilhelm takes advantage of the situation and jumps down and stabs into its eye. With the whale's gaze now locked onto him, Wilhelm smiled before letting out an unsettling laugh. The whale's pupils then dilated in panic as Wilhelm began to madly cut around its eye at light speed. And with the whale's pupil still dilated in fear, the eye drooped out of its socket before falling to the ground. Seeing its fall, Wilhelm then drops down and stabs into it before it hits the ground. And with his back face to the beast, he lands on the ground before facing towards us. Raaaaaaggh. With mighty yell, he raised up his sword to showcase his achievement. And all the soldiers just looked on in silence before a sudden change occurred. An excitement that you could somehow feel and hear had appeared. It was so strong and enticing, you could almost taste it. Yeah. And with that feeling running through our veins, we let out a mighty roar of excitement. The beast had been humiliated. Looking back at the whale, I saw its eye visibly redden as it stared directly at the eye present on Wilhelm's sword. I saw it then turn a deep red as its skin started to open and close rapidly in random areas. Crush. It's getting angry. Hearing my yell, Wilhelm whistles and jumps onto his mount before rushing towards the rest of us. Ricardo also follows closely behind him as the two twins follow suit. Now all together, we look towards the whale which was preparing for its attack. Stage 2 begins now. Healers be at the ready. Mages prepare for the shockwave. Hearing crush, the mages who were left near the weapon had finished their spell on time. Ha! They then let out a collective shout as their mana activated, creating a small beam to shoot out from the weapon's top. The white beam then split into beams of 4s before shooting out in separate directions. They then stopped at the same time and shot directly into the ground. Once buried, 4 pillars of white light appeared. The 4 pillars then shot massive walls of light to encompass all of us inside a barrier. And as the whale let out its massive roar, it caused the air outside of the barrier to visibly shake. A dense mist then followed suit, blocking our vision of the outside world. Looking to my right, I saw Crush looking at me also. I then nodded towards her to tell her it was over before pointing towards the healers. Understanding, she waved at the healers and mages before grabbing a hold of her sword. Get ready, I'm going to clear the mist. The mages then split up and gathered around the 4 main points of the barrier before slowly dismantling it. The healers, however, started to cast magic on all of the soldiers to prepare them for the mist's effects. Once the barrier was down, a quick flash of white showed before allowing the mist to slowly sink towards us. Crush, seeing this, raises her sword before slashing madly in all directions, including up. Once done, we all hear multiple different moans. And when we look up, we see 3 different whales looking down on us as they flew in circles. Crush, however, just sent a smirk up before letting out a long slice that hit both of the whales that were below the third. Stay vigilant. Now is the time we have truly been waiting for. Squad 2 and 3 will focus on leading the other 2 around. The mages will go with Squad 1 to help bring that cowardly thing down to say hi. Healers will stay under the protection of the 4th squad. Crush then raised her sword upward and pointing at the real whale. Now let's have fun. Yeah. Seeing everyone so excited, I let out a smile and let the group's moral affect me. And with a gaze directed at the real whale looking down on us, I let out a yell of my own. It's time to slaughter this oversized goldfish. 16 comments, 0 vote. Gravity. When my cry ended, squads 3 and 2 blasted off towards their own designated whale. The 2 clones of the whale then locked their gazes onto the separate squads before starting to rain down blobs of concentrated mist. Impressively, the 2 groups were not phased and avoided the mist with a beautiful show of skill. The 2 clones, noticing this, moaned in annoyance before speeding up the rate of their fire. However, this only caused the 2 groups to get slightly serious before smoothly maneuvering themselves in a quick and precise manner. Now close to their designated clone. The 2 groups had certain people jump onto the clones while yelling with a rope tied to their waists and stabbed into the whale. They then pulled out a dagger before repeatedly stabbing the 2 clones. The people below then grasped a hold of all the ropes with a grunt before wrapping it around their wrist. Once firmly in place, the riders on the ground started to run in their designated directions before laughing madly. That crazy kid was right, these things are light. Seeing Squad 2 and Squad 3 madly leading the clones around and stabbing them repeatedly, Crush turned towards the remaining squads. It's time for Squad 1 to prepare for the takedown of the Demon of the Mist. All remaining soldiers will stand by and protect the mages and healers. She then turned towards me and gave me a look. Understanding, I rummaged in my pockets before pulling out a necklace. On this necklace was a crystal similar to Amelia's. But instead of being green, it had an extremely dark color that looked to be almost alive and radiated a feeling of extreme coldness. Russell had sold this to Crush for the tactic we are about to currently attempt. This stone holds a pretty powerful yin spirit. It's nowhere near a great spirit's level, but it is enough to cast and hold a medium-high level yin spell for a good 10 minutes. Putting on the necklace, I feel the spirit inside it stir as it locks its attention onto me. I felt it stare at me for a good while before suddenly accepting my use of it before going back to sleep. It seems Amelia was right about how spirits speak. I can't see it, but I can certainly feel the intentions that it shoots towards me. I guess I now have a very good affinity for spirits. I'll add that to the list of small advantages I now hold over this world. I then looked around and noticed all the mages surrounding the warriors of Squad 1. Wilhelm, Ricardo, and the twins under Ricardo's control were all a part of Squad 1. There is also the mix between the strongest of the 2 separate parties' warriors. This consists of the strongest from the Fang of Iron, and the strongest from the Karsten, or Crush's, household. Crush, noticing everyone in their place, shouted at the mages. Begin the launching of Squad 1. The mages, hearing her words, looked towards the warriors of Squad 1's feet and pointed their palms towards the ground. The warriors, noticing this, all lowered their center of gravity and locked their eyes on the main white whale. Dona. This sends walls of earth in the shape of pillars blasting through the ground and throwing the warriors up into the air at insane speeds as they let out a battle cry. The whale, noticing the yells, just looked down at the hundreds of humans flying right towards it. The whale then just let out an extremely loud and audible laugh. The stupid thing laughed. And after it was done laughing, it then quickly moved out of the way as the humans went flying right past it. Now looking up, the whale looked at all the people flying straight up and gave an almost human expression of amusement. Whoosh. Puncture. But then its face suddenly froze in visible shock before slowly turning its one eye towards its side. And what it found was a massive pillar of ice going from one side of its body to the other. The mages had earlier all gathered together under the cloud of humans flying toward the beast and combined their mana into a massive spell of fire. And when the whale looked away, they silently sent it towards its side with a little surprise present on top of it. Hello, you goldfish ripoff. My voice rang out suddenly, causing its remaining eye to lock onto its forehead. And on top of it was yours truly. Seeing its attention, I unsheathed my sword before stabbing into its skin and closing my eyes to focus on the crystal. I then felt it flood its mana into my gate and assist in helping me form the spell I desire. And when I felt the spell complete, I looked down at the whale with an extremely cold look and whispered to it. El Murak. Once those words were complete, the whale widened its eyes in fear and shock as its gravity increased to a scary degree, making it fall at an extreme speed towards the ground. Holding on for dear life, I looked up and noticed a cloud of people coming straight towards the whale's body. Ha 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 ha. And with a laugh they all unsheathed their swords and stabbed into the whale, also finding a place to hold on to. Ricardo then let out a hearty laugh as he saw the ground rapidly approaching. Brace yourselves, dudes. BOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOO blast all of the remaining mist away. And along with the shockwave, the clones disappeared. Every one of the squads then stopped and looked towards the massive amount of dust hiding the warriors of Squad 1 and the White Whale. Ha 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 ha, that was sick, my dude. A hearty voice then yelled out before a sudden gust of wind was produced, clearing the dust and showing the scene to all present on the battlefield. What is revealed is every member of Squad 1, relatively, unharmed. The reason for this is because of me using Murak on everyone including myself. This stunt however drained a lot from the spirit's mana present in the crystal, sending it into a deep slumber. Behind us is a pitiful and almost sad sight. A giant white figure is seen moaning in anguish as it tried desperately to move. The ring above it had been shattered from the fall, permanently disabling its ability to fly. And with its body also taking damage, it is also paralyzed from the neck down. All it can do now is look at all the humans laughing and pointing in its miserable state. I almost felt pity for the creature, the key word however is, almost. Turning to Wilhelm I, see him staring at the miserable state of the white whale before looking at me. Seeing his gaze, I only give him a smile and nod as I step back. Thank you, Subaru, he said with a solemn gaze and smile before drawing his blade and jumping on top of the whale. And upon already knowing what was about to happen, I look towards the white whale, which is currently gazing directly at me with all the hatred it can possibly muster. Giving one last glance at its pitiful state, I just give it an insulting smile before turning and leaving with some parting words. Sweet dreams, you Moby Dick rip-off. Walking towards a bed of flowers, I hear Wilhelm's yells and deep echoes coming from the slashes of his sword. Everyone had gone quiet around me and glanced at me with respect as I passed by them before returning their gaze towards Wilhelm. And upon finally finding who I was looking for, I notice the mighty yell of Crush. Wilhelm van Astria has slain the demon of the mist. Yeah. And with that yell, many screams of joy and relief rang out. Looking back towards the people, I could see men laughing, I could see them smile with joy and look at their fellow comrades with respect. I could see the healers working tirelessly, notice some of them even crying over a fallen patient, or other healers covering the dead with a sad expression. But how is it that I feel absolutely? How is it that I don't feel a single drop of happiness from the victory? I know why, and it makes me hate this atmosphere even more. While their battle is ending, mine is just beginning. I then take a look at the horizon and notice the sun start to rise and paint the sky with a bright orange with a calm expression. I still have one more thing to do. I then felt a tug on my sleeve and turned to see Rem staring into my eyes while worried. You don't seem to be happy at all over this victory, are you alright? Hearing her words, I wrapped my arms around her before pulling her into a hug. We then stayed together for a good minute in silence before I pulled back and gave her a bright smile. Thank you, Rem. For what? She asked while looking at me with confusion. I then laughed a bit at her confusion before planting my lips on hers. Rem, still confused, was a bit shocked at my sudden attack but soon returned it with full force. And when we pulled back, I noticed Felix staring at us with a teasing expression. Oh. Did Ferris interrupt you too? Hearing him, I felt a mix between shame and anger come over me. In return to his question, I huffed before grabbing a hold of Rem's hand. Let's go get some privacy, Rem. Privacy. Hearing her question, I just throw a confused look towards her. Yeah, or do you want him to watch? He would watch. 12 comments, 0 vote. What now? As Rem and I walked hand in hand, we admired the rising sun in silence. It was a calming experience to say the least. And as we walked, I was going over the various scenarios I had planned out. The white whale was dead, but I wasn't finished yet. I still had much more to do. Now I could go ahead and leave, but I want to keep on with the current events of the story. However, I have already reached a change in my plans. And that change is currently holding my hand in silence. Without Rem's disappearance, Rosewall won't forget her. And since Rosewall can't forget her, his gospel is incorrect. The only thing I could do is either kill him while he's weakened from the book's instructions or make a bet with him like the original Subaru did. I will definitely have to think this over before I get to Sanctuary. But I need to figure out on what I should to do with Beetlejuice. I will certainly fight tooth and nail to rip out his throat, but I need to find a counter to Unseen Hand. Because of my lack of deaths, I don't have the same connection with the witch that the original Subaru did. My only advantage over him is both Julius and a surprise attack. But I also have the advantage in knowledge. I know a way to find all of his fingers and cut the all off, leaving only me. But if my plan works correctly, I won't have to worry about his possession ability. But I have also avoided sending a letter to the Rosewall mansion. As Amelia is currently working in Rosewall's stead, she would get the letter. And knowing her personality, she would alert all of the witch cultists by trying to slaughter them all. But as we silently walked and I was lost in my thoughts, I felt Rem suddenly nudge me. Turning towards her, she then pointed her head behind us. Looking back, I saw Crush standing there with Wilhelm by her side. She then smiled at me before putting her hand towards me. Nitsuki Subaru, I thank you for your amazing performance. I will be sure to send that blacksmith of yours the best parts and pay all your funds using House Karsten's resources. Taking her hand, I shook it firmly before giving her a bright smile. The pleasure was all mine. This battle has shown that I have a lot to improve in. Yes, looking at the capabilities of Wilhelm and the Ricardo, I have now found a goal for myself. A goal to someday reach and surpass them. And I appreciate the hospitality you have shown me by covering my equipment's expenses. Releasing our hands, she gave me one last look before nodding to Wilhelm before going off to manage the remaining soldiers. Wilhelm then took a step forward and got right in front of me. He then looked down at me before smiling and getting upon a knee. Nitsuki Subaru, because of you, I have finally completed my reason for living. And because of this, I will make it up to you in any way possible. He then raised his head before thumping his hand upon his chest. That is why I, Wilhelm van Astria, wish to follow your commands only second to my lady. Whatever you wish of me, I will do. For I owe you my everything. Looking at this powerful man down on his knee declaring his servitude towards me. I felt a bit complicated before feeling his conviction. That is when I made the decision to accept with his wish. I then exhaled slowly before taking on a serious expression. I, Nitsuki Subaru, accept your wish. I hope we can do amazing things, Sir Wilhelm. I then reached my hand out and pulled him up before patting him on the shoulder. We then stared at each other for a couple seconds before I then gave him an awkward face. Say, I may need your services right now. After speaking with Wilhelm, I decided to wait for merchants to arrive. I just stood near the main road and talked with Rem for a bit before seeing the merchants come over a hill. With them was Anastasia's backup. The backup consisted of a small amount of young knights and Julius. Julius was of course probably going by Julie. Seeing them, I decided to wait for the merchants to set up camp before approaching them. Julius, noticing my approach, waved over a couple of the younger knights before coming to greet me. I'm guessing you are Nitsuki Subaru. Yes, I am, and I'm guessing you are Julius, correct? He then gave a light cough at the name that was used before looking past me as if searching for someone before pointing towards himself. I have no idea who that is. I am Julie, mercenary. Looking at his antics, I have a smile of understanding before turning serious. All right then, Julie, it is. Can you gather all of the people under you? Seeing my expression, he just nodded before sending a glance towards a young knight by his side. The knight seeing his glance then went off to collect everybody. This, everybody, included Ricardo and the rest of the Fang of Iron. When everyone was gathered around in a circle I motioned for them to take a seat. Most of the mercenaries took a seat except for Julie, and the knights under him. Shall we begin? Julius then said calmly. I then looked at him before shaking my head. We still have 2 more people to wait on. Who exactly are these people? The sword demon and Fair. Before I could finish, a familiar weight crashed onto my back with a quiet NHYA. Naihatsuki. We are all ready. Knowing it was Felix, I felt a slight tingle in my ears again before suddenly feeling an extremely cold gaze land on me. Turning, I saw Rem standing next to Wilhelm with more soldiers behind them. She was currently looking at me and Felix with an unsettling blue glare present in her eyes. Rem, is something the matter? Felix feeling the gaze looked over a Rem before looking at me. He then blew in my ear before sending her a sly grin. No need to worry Rem, Ferris won't take Naihatsuki from you. He then got up off my back before walking in front of Rem and giving her a soft smile. Ferris loves Lady Crush after all. Rem then drilled her gaze into his face for a little while longer before it started to soften. Once chilled out, she looked towards me with a slight pout before walking over and sitting next to me in silence. You better make this up for me, Subaru. Hearing her, I put my hand in hers. Don't worry Rem, I'll be sure to make it up. And with our hands still interlocked I looked over at the 2 groups which were now gathered together. All of them were staring at me and Rem. Some showed no visible interest in our interaction, but Ricardo and some others gave me a teasing grin. Feeling a bit embarrassed, I coughed to clear both my throat in embarrassment before turning my gaze back to them. Alright, now it's time to discuss my counter to the witch cult's plans. Today is the day we kill a archbishop and set an example to the rest of that disgusting cult of simps. With the mention of the witch cult and an archbishop, many of the people there visibly stiffened up in rage. And this made sense, the witches' cult literally destroyed whole kingdoms just because they were offended. This caused a lot of hatred to form between the people and the cult. All of these people in front of me would get off to slaughtering these crazies. Excuse me Subaru, but you mentioned an archbishop. Julius said to me with a serious gaze. Yes, the Archbishop of Sloth is going to run the attack on the village. And you are going to be the one to kill him. And how will I do that? I then gave him a sly smile before pointing at the white whale being dismantled behind me. By using the knowledge I possess, of course. 9 comments 0 vote. Discussing the plans. When everyone was quiet, I began speaking. So, let us begin with what I know. I know that the Archbishop of Sloth is going to be leading the attack on the village, and I also know of his ability to possess his fingers. Julius then spoke up. What do you mean by possess his fingers? His fingers are vessels for his soul to run to. When his body dies, he'll destroy the finger's soul before making home inside it, effectively being reborn. Hearing me, everyone went silent for a moment. One of the men then yelled out in frustration. How do we stop something like that? Don't tell me you know where these fingers will be to you. Hearing the random man's question, everyone turned to each other and started to share their doubts. Seeing how they are acting, I looked towards both Ricardo and Julius in hopes of them calming them down. Ricardo seeing my gaze, he proceeded to hit one of his men on the back of the head, causing an audible slap to get everyone's attention before letting out a hearty laugh. Cut it out. Subaru here clearly has a plan for this. Right? He then asked with a complicated look. Now with everyone's focus back on me, I coughed before continuing. Well, we need to destroy or weaken his soul enough to where possession is impossible. My hand raised to point at Julius. The best way to do this is to use Julie, he is a spirit master. That means, he has the ability to damage the Archbishop of Sloth's soul using his spirits. Understood. Everyone looked at Julius before looking back at me and nodded in understanding. Happy to get this point across, I then turned extremely serious. But we have one main issue which will help us immensely if solved with any information related to the fingers. What is it? They all said collectively. We have some spies hidden within our merchants. I've learned that they have a bag full of firestones hidden away underneath one of the carriage's boards. This could cause some severe damage to both use and the village while giving them a chance to slaughter all of us while confused. Their gazes then snapped to the merchants and showed uncomfortable looks. It was probably from having potential witch cultists so close to them. I'd look away from them before he gets suspicious. I've already figured out who the spy is. I went ahead and had all the merchants observed in secret. He is also in current possession of a media, so I want you to ambush him and take him out silently when he finally reports to his superiors. Once done, we will use his media to track down all the fingers and slaughter them along with any traces of witch cultists. Once done with that, we will then have Julius and I go and take down the Archbishop of Sloth. I hope for you to successfully ambush that merchant spy and slaughter them all while I speak with Lady Amelia. After my words, everyone went into thought before Ricardo just starting laughing and smacking the backs of his group. Why are you so serious, guys? Didn't I teach you pups to live in the moment? But then Ricardo's face turned dead serious, a rare sight for those who know him. And besides, he's finally giving us a change to take our fight to the witch cult, and Archbishop at that. That's why I won't even stutter with my decision. Ricardo then walked over to my side and let out a goofy smile before sticking his hand up into a fist. I'm down to rumble with those bastards. With Ricardo's words, his group went silent before one of them let out a laugh. He's right. We weren't taught to be so serious. He then jumped up and walked beside me before letting out a yell. Let's kill those bastards. Then many others rose up and stood beside me. Some of them even showing the same enthusiasm as Ricardo and the randoms. With all of Ricardo's group at my side, I turned towards Wilhelm and Julius. Wilhelm, noticing my gaze, just walked calmly beside me with his group before speaking calmly. I have already vowed to repay my life debt to you, Subaru, and my wife and I also despise the cultists, so you're actually doing me another favor. Julius, or Julie, I suppose, also made his way over with a silent smile. And all of the knights behind him also had the same smile. Destroying the witch cult's people sounds honorable. It would without a doubt fulfill a lot of my men's and also my goals. When everyone stood beside me, I could only feel satisfaction. Having all these numbers would help speed things up significantly. I then let out a cough, catching everyone's attention. All right, now, I would like Wilhelm, Ricardo, and Julius to stay with me. This also includes Ferris. The rest of you can go and take a rest. We'll leave in a quarter's time. Julius's knights may not be tired, but Ricardo and Wilhelm certainly are. If not physically tired, they are mentally. And with my words said and done, Ricardo and Wilhelm's men let out a smile of relief before going to lay down in some grass to catch a quick rest. And with Felix, Ricardo, and Wilhelm remaining, I plan to inform them of their goals and actions for this fight. These goals and actions will also include the groups they are in control of. Alright, you four, let's go ahead and get this conversation done with. I just want to go over some quick details. Ricardo's group will focus on tracking and killing the fingers and cultists minus the twins. Julius's group will split and help Ricardo's group. Ferris will help out in any healing you need done. Wilhelm will also split his group into helping out in taking out the cultists. But I want the other half along with Wilhelm to help protect the people of the village. Julius and I will take the rest of his men and kill the Archbishop along with any remaining cultists. The twins will also come along to help also. I then gazed at all four of them. Is this understood? Understood. 14 comments, 0 vote. Envy. After an hour of rest, I gathered the merchants and had them stick close towards the center of our formation. As we were going into combat, I had Wilhelm and his men stick close to the merchants. I also told Wilhelm to inform me of whenever our spy moved. Ricardo and his mercenaries will be split between the front and the back as they currently have the most people out of all of them. I have Ricardo in front. Julius and his group will take the back and watch over there. Julius, however, will be with me. I've already informed him of the bewitching spell and illusions that will be cast. I'm currently in between Julius and Wilhelm as Petrash carries both me and Rem. And looking up, I make a relative judgment of the time and how long we have traveled. We should be coming up on the village. I then said calmly to the three. Prepare for anything. But before I could finish, everyone vanished. In place of everyone, is a lonely and desolate road. Petrash was also gone and I found myself standing alone in silence. A light purple mist was also present and the trees had no leaves. Many of the trees also had their bark totally peeled off or were broken. Noticing a dark shadow present over me, I looked up and saw that the sun was eclipsed. And the sky was a weird purple compared to its usual blue. Crack. Whipping my head towards the direction of the sound, I saw a man. The man's eyes were uncomfortable to look into and his breathing was heavy. He had tears rolling down his cheeks and his body was shaking due to working against his fatigue. Excuse me. I said loudly, what are you doing out here? His eyes then darted towards me and locked his gaze with mine. His eyes showed deep fear and panic when he looked into mine. But I could tell it wasn't towards me. She, no, it is coming. The man said to me while out of breath. Run now. What is Kami? Swish. But before I could ask what it was, the shadows inside the forest seemed to come alive and grab a hold of him. The shadows then wrapped around his body before reaching towards his neck. And with a twist, an audible snap rang throughout the silent forest. The mont's neck was twisted and I could visibly see the flesh tear as his head turned a full 180. Frozen in shock, my mind subconsciously tried to make sense of what just happened. But instinctively, I knew that it had indeed happened. A shadow had killed a man. The shadow then dragged the man quickly into the forest, making everything go silent. Step. But then a pair of quiet footsteps appeared. Step. And they audibly got louder. Step. And when the steps reached their peak, a hazy and black figure appeared. The figure was in the shape of a female, but the features of its face could not be identified as the shadow around it constantly shifted and moved. The figure had 2 white dots in replacement of its eyes and used them to drill their sights straight into me. But the gaze wasn't exactly at me. The eyes felt as if they were trying to drill directly into my soul and figure out all the secrets inside me. I already know who it is, and I already know it's a spell. But why hasn't Julie gotten me out yet? Why am I still here? Why is she here? We just stood there in silence before it spoke out a sentence filled with only one emotion, and it was hate. Die, you imposter. And with those words, a foreboding sense of despair and coldness overtook me. What? Swish. And in my confusion and fear, a black blur came from it before wrapping around my face. I could feel it grasp tightly onto my skull, covering my mouth, disabling my voice before slowly increasing its pressure as it madly started to yell. Die. 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 I could feel my skull slowly crack from the pressure as excruciating pain and audible creaks began to come from my head. I tired to scream, but they were only muffled. Imposter. Fake. Thief. Just die. And with every word, I could feel my skull slowly break apart and my hearing began to fade along with my conscience. And as my voice finally gave up, the final thing I heard from it was one word full of pain and sadness. Die. Pop. Silence. With a loud inhale, I reached up and wrapped my hands around my head. I could feel pain pounding as it covered my whole entire skull. It felt like I was taking a sledgehammer repeatedly to the skull. But besides the pain, I felt an uncomfortable sense of confusion. Was that an illusion? If not, then why now of all times? Did she perhaps intercept the illusion? If so, what else can she use her powers to interfere with? Even so, I've at least learned or can come to the conclusion that she is not at all on my side. That is, of course, if it was actually her and not the original illusion. But before I could think of anything else, I felt an unbearable pain from the inside of my head, causing me to scream quietly in pain. It felt as if someone was slowly burning my brain and sticking countless needles inside it repeatedly. The pain made it to where I couldn't focus on anything at all, I couldn't even hear anything. But then I felt a comfortable flow of energy slowly spread throughout my being. And as the feeling left, the pain was also dragged along with it. And with the pain gone, I stopped screaming and sat in absolute silence for a long time before my hearing slowly returned to me. When I opened my eyes, I saw the ceiling of a carriage. Where are we? I immediately asked while silently staring at the ceiling. And what time is it? We are currently at the village Nyatsuki. Felix's voice then informed me. Ferris spent a bit of effort healing you. Julius or Julie broke the first illusion, but you somehow got yourself trapped in a more powerful one. And it was powerful enough to physically harm you. You about died, UNHYOW. He then scooted himself closer to me and grabbed my chin before looking into my eyes and stuck his finger out. Follow. He then went through some more standard medical procedures before scooting back to his original position. Do you feel any pain? Hearing his question, I silently sat up and stared at him. No, I'm fine. Thank you. Now where is Wilhelm and Julie? Felix just sighed and shook his head in exasperation. They have already caught the spy and grabbed a media from him. We are using it to hunt down all of the fingers. That girlfriend of yours was really worried about you but decided to go ahead and talk it out with the current lady in charge. She also has a pretty unique connection with those villagers too. They of course blew up at first, but she managed to somehow cough. Calm them down. The bomb inside the spy's carriage was also extracted, and we fed all the mana inside the stones into your necklace as requested. Silently listening to the situation, I smiled a bit at the mention of Rem. I guess I owe her even more now, don't I? Felix just gave me a small yet sad smile in return. Yes you do, I also owe someone a lot. We then quietly sat together and thought. I was silently getting myself pieced together and wondering what adverse effects this may cause me in the future. He was probably thinking about Crush. Oh wait. He's going to have to reattach her arm later. I mean, I could have warned her, but if Regulus and Roy were to have a false reading in their gospel, I don't even want to think about the chaotic events that would inspire. Plus, I have no reason to help her out. I only made a deal with her for the people who are currently killing the cultists for me. The things that happened to her have nothing to do with my deal with her. And I can only hope Rem wasn't a central role in the reading for Roy's gospel. That would put the archbishops of gluttony on edge. But at least Felix hasn't forgotten Crush. That means she wasn't eaten by Roy. So things are going relatively well, if I don't count the witch. Is he awake, Ferris? Julius's voice came before peeking his head into the carriage. Yes, I'm awake. I say nonchalantly before questioning him. Is everything done now? He only nods before looking at me with a serious expression. What exactly happened? You were hit by an extremely strong bewitching spell. I had to use all 6 of the spirit's power for a constant time period to even make a dent in that thing. I just looked at him in silence before slowly getting up to my feet and dusting my pants and shirt clean of any dust and dirt that was present on the carriage floor. Nothing really, I just had a run-in with a yandere. Yandere? He asked. What is a yandere? I then chuckled a bit before jumping out of the carriage. I then took a glance around and noticed that we were in the middle of town and all the villagers were being directed into separate carriages. It's nothing to worry yourself about. Now let's go and kill Archbishop. But as I started to walk towards the village's exit, he grasped my shoulder and turned me around to face him. Subaru, can you do it? You nearly just died. What you're doing currently isn't normal. Look at me and honestly tell me you're prepared. My face then fell into an extremely neutral expression. I didn't feel anything, to be honest, I just feel this question to be a waste of time and honestly a bit annoying. Julius, an archbishop won't scare me if that's what you're implying. Don't assume that I would break down and quit from an illusion of that magnitude. I then grasped his hand and used a bit of strengthening magic to pull it off with ease, causing him to raise an eyebrow in surprise. I then turned and calmly started to walk towards the exit of this village before calmly urging him to come with me. Now, like I said before, now let's go and kill an archbishop. 26 comments, 0 vote. Chopping a hand off. After walking along the dirt road for a good amount of time, I stopped and waited for the cultists to come to me. Julius is currently tracking me by the spirit he put inside me. The spirit is contracted to him, so he has a nigh-perfect read on my location. Now where are these guys? They should have sniffed me out by now. I did purposely leave some stragglers so they would lead me to Patelgu's. Swoosh. I then heard multiple sounds of the wind being torn before finding myself surrounded by cultists. They all had their robes and masks covering themselves and silently stood around me. Seeing them silently stand there, I calmly told them a command. Take me to Sloth. Hearing me, they all interchanged gazes before nodding and all pointing their arms in one direction. And with that, they bowed before dashing back into the shadows of the forest. I stared in the direction they pointed for a second before taking a deep breath to prepare myself. I even felt at my wrists to make sure all my knives were safely secured and all there. Feeling all 10 of them, I let out an exhale and started walking through the forest. And as I walked, I ran into a pack of demon beasts. But I had a magic stone from the village. These stones made it to where demon beasts treat the user of one like air. A lot of adventurers and families that are pretty well off actually buy these stones for their own safety. But anyways, I made my way past the beasts and came upon a steep hill that went on for a good minute or two. I had to break some branches here and there, but I managed to hit the clearing I was looking for. In this clearing was a structure that dug into a cliffside. The structure looked ancient and old, some parts of its walls were glazed over with moss and were full of cracks. These cracks ran deep, but somehow the structure. No ruins was still standing. And at the entrance of the ruins was a figure whose face was covered from its shade. The figure noticing took a couple steps before a pale face revealed itself. His eyes were red, unblinking, and had deep blue bags underneath them. His hair was in the style of a simple bowl cut but had an interesting green color. He also had an uncomfortable smile that reached from ear to the other. His teeth were yellow and jagged, his fingers were covered in scars, and his figure seemed frail and brittle. And once he had gotten close enough to me, he bowed his head and spread his cape in greeting. Greetings, believer in love, I am the Archbishop of Sloth. His face then shot up and stared directly at me with an insane smile. Patelgus Romani Conti, at your service. He then shot up into a standing position before continuing. How wonderful it is to have you here, a child blessed with love. How wonderful. Feeling a bit awkward with a hint of impatience, I took a bow of courtesy. It is wonderful to be greeted by Sloth, my name is Nitsuki Sabaru. I then raised my head and stared directly into his eyes with a calm smile. I have come from the snow or the north to fulfill my gospel's command to become one of your fingers. He then paused and stared at me in silence before suddenly arching his back and letting out a fit of sobs. Oh. How dedicated, how utterly terrifying dedicated, oh how slothful I am. And as tears steamed down his eyes, he straightened himself before quickly jumping forward and pulling me into a hug as his sobbing intensified. Forgive me for my sloth suburu. Patting the crazed man on the back, I smile before slowly grabbing a knife present in my sleeve. And as I bring it close to his back, I give him some parting words. Don't worry, I am merely following my own interests. Shank. Juice. His sobbing then froze along with his body. Feeling him stiffen up, I grasped my hold even tighter onto the dagger in his back before twisting roughly and pulling it out. I had made sure to stab him in an area I was confident held his heart. And as I brought him slowly to the ground, I felt my face twist uncontrollably into a smile as he looked up at me with a gaze of confusion and fear. And his gaze almost even looked sane. How did you stab? Taking advantage of his shock and confusion, I stabbed directly into the side of his skull and stared him directly in the eyes to make sure the light that was held within them had faded. Once positive of his body's death, I took a step back before looking towards the forest and calmly spoke. Do it. Julius then jumped out of the forest and showed to have his sword covered in a deep crimson. He had cleared out any and all cultists around us. Al Clarista. With those words, the spirits that he had contracted showed themselves before infusing into his blade, and the spirit he left inside me also went inside, creating a huge white light to emit from it. He then raised it up before quickly bringing it down on top of Beetlejuice's body. Boom. And with that strike, it created a huge plume of dust to shoot up and caused the ruins nearest to also collapse from the tremors it causes the ground to produce. Watching it collapse, I saw a stray cultist make it out before it was destroyed and look around in confusion. Quickly infusing my arm with magic, I threw an extremely quick and powerful dagger as it silently cut through both the air and through his chest. Observing the ruins for a couple minutes longer, I confidently decided that nobody could survive that long under that many tons of rock and dirt. Now turning my gaze towards the crater caused by Julius's blow, I saw a pile of ashes present in place of Patelgius's body. Walking over to the ashes, I strengthened my leg before giving a swift kick. This caused the ashes to be thrown away. Underneath the ashes was a gospel, it had somehow made it through Julius' attack. But how? The gospel that Rosewall had could be burned by throwing it inside a normal fireplace. But then again, that was a gospel artificially created by Echidna. But who was the one who made the original gospels? Should I destroy this thing? I mean, it's pretty much useless to me. The pages are blank. This means that the person whose destiny was written inside it is dead. This also means, Juice is dead. Is that a gospel? Julius's voice then ran from behind me before turning deadly serious. If so, destroy that accursed thing. I just look over my shoulder at him before pocketing it. It survived a full power attack from you, do you honestly think you can destroy it? In response, Julius gave me a deep frown before sighing. I guess that's true. He then turned his head towards where Patelgus Juice was killed. He had an extremely complicated look on his face. Are you sure he's dead? I mean, he was an archbishop after all. This seemed almost too easy to be true. I walked up to him before patting his shoulder. Relax, there wasn't any words written in the gospel. That means Sloth is no more. Patting his shoulder one more time, I walked over to the cultist I put a hole through and searched around for my knife. Looking around, I found it embedded in a tree. I then used some strengthening magic to pull it out before looking at its edge and smiled. If this knife is still sharp, that means that old man will make me something crazy. But my gaze caused me to frown as directed it towards the red present on its blade. That blood had just made me realize that I had just killed a person. Calmly gazing at the body of the cultist with a literal hole going through his chest, I can't help but feel confused. But why? Why don't I feel anything? 20 comments 0 vote. A magical breakthrough. Walking back into the village with Julius, I saw Felix with a stern expression as a man spoke to him. I guess he got news of Crush's disappearance. I mean, they were set to return at a certain period of time. They of course don't know that 2 archbishops attacked her. But they do know that something has gone wrong because of her group's disappearance. I then put a hand on my chest before making a complicated expression. With Sloth dead, I should have his authority lying inside me. But this also means I need to go to Sanctuary as soon as possible. The authority inside me could very well break my mind and soul just like to did Patelgu's. Luckily, I can drink Echidna's blood, or as she likes to call it, bodily fluids, to fully integrate it safely inside my soul. Is Sloth dead? Felix said as he brought his gaze off the messenger and onto me. If so, we have a problem. Your issue, not mine. What is it? He then made a tense expression full with worry. Lady Crush and her group has gone missing. Hearing him, I took a quick look around and tried to think of what to do. All of the villagers have been safely split apart and sent either to the Karsten household or the Sanctuary. Everyone who helped take down the cultists are all sitting in the center of town. Those who are injured are currently being treated by healers. Clearing my throat, I decided to let out a yell to grab their attention. The Archbishop of Sloth is dead. These words caused everyone to turn their attention towards me in both surprise and disbelief before speaking in between themselves. What? Who now? The Sloth is dead. An Archbishop. Just like that. I then reinforced my hands with magic before slapping them together to make a loud crack resound throughout all their ears. Yes, the Archbishop of Sloth is dead. One of our greatest enemies has finally been slain. This is an achievement that will undoubtedly be remembered for all of history. That is why I will give you some time to celebrate this achievement and recover your strength. But be warned, after this celebration we will immediately leave and look for Lady Crush, who has been reported to be missing. Do you understand? I then scanned my eyes over them as they all showed looks ranging between disbelief, shock, and joy. I said, do you understand? Yes, sir. When I was done speaking to all the soldiers, I decided to sit on the steps of one of the buildings closer to the outside of town to both rest and clear my head. I had after all went skydiving with a gravity-increased whale, got mind arped by a witch, and got the jump on a broken man. I at least deserve some type of rest, I suppose. I then ran a quick scan through my gate and found it to be full. Recently, I have been trying to figure out a way to get more mana for my gate, as my gate has a limit to the amount of mana it holds. So I went over a couple theories on how to increase it. The most solid one I could come up with would be to simply make my mana more dense and pure. I had actually tried to do this, but I had failed due to my control over my mana not being strong enough. When controlling mana, it depends on how much willpower you have. And if I'm right, I should have enough willpower to safely convert my mana into a denser form of energy from the witch's mind FCK. Grasping a hold of the mana with my will, I took a death breath before focusing on compressing my mana towards the center of the gate. I then controlled it and managed to get past the stages that I struggled though with ease before reaching the final stages of the process. This process is hypothetically where my mana should take on a much denser and pure form of energy. The gaseous mana that was being compressed into a smaller and smaller form started to get bright and bright before making what looked to be a droplet or water. Taking a closer look at my creation, I noticed that it had a reflective glow and a surprising amount of energy present inside it. If I'm right, just this droplet alone could allow me to cast all Shamak with the amount of pure magical energy it possesses. The droplet is a bitch black and holds an extremely cold chill along with an increase in its oppressive aura when compared to its past mana predecessor. Bringing my mind out of my gate, I stick up my hand in front of face before letting out a smile. I then looked toward a rock present on the outskirts of the village. Waking up towards it, I stuck my hand on it before making a relatable judgment on its size. It's about 3 times larger than me in both diameter and height. This sound do. Getting into a orthodox stance before reinforcing my legs, hips, back, and arms. With all of them reinforced, I took a solid step and twisted my hips to throw a solid straight dead center into the rock. Boom. Quickly reinforcing my skin, organs, muscles, and bones, I stuck my arms out in front of me as small pieces of rock flew around at bullet speed. A couple managed to hit me and pierce through my skin, but I was lucky enough for them to be stopped by hardened muscle. When the dust finally cleared, I controlled my muscles with magic to make the pieces of rock slide out. Looking at the destruction caused by a simple left, I can't help but be a bit shocked. It turns out that the rock I had bunched had actually been just a small piece of it. Most of the rock had actually been embedded in the ground. And as I looked at a roughly 50-meter line going in a straight line, I could also tell that it was deep enough to fit 5 people all on each other's shoulders. In shock at my punch's power, I quickly went inside of my gate and looked at the droplet of mana. From reinforcing all of my body to handle the rock shrapnel and produce enough force for my destructive straight, I had burned through half of the mana present inside the droplet. Seeing that honestly made my happiness die out. All I could think of doing now was to try my best in increasing my gate's mana to its limit once again. Getting my mind out of my gate, I wanted to test its effects of my brain. But I heard some hasty steps before I could and saw Wilhelm and the others all armed for battle. Seeing them all lock eyes onto me, I just raised my hand and calmly answered the questions going inside their head. Don't worry, I was just testing some things. I then looked towards the sun in the sky before nodding my head. I then looked back towards them before giving out a smirk. As you are all up and about, we should probably get on our way. 17 comments 0 vote. A star-filled sky. After my short talk with the remaining soldiers, I made sure to make sure all of my equipment was on me before finding Patrash. When I found her, she let out one of her little reptile cat purrs before softly rubbing her scaly head on my chest. This action of hers honestly made me chuckle a bit. She reminded me of a cat I used to own back when I was a kid. But upon looking at the sword near Patrash, I can't help but let out a sigh. I had to leave that behind when going to kill Sloth. I honestly doubt that he would have gotten close enough for me to stab him in the back if I had brought it. Another plus for using hidden weapons, I guess. Alright girl, I'm going to hop on now. I informed her as I rubbed the scales below her chin. She then got down low enough for me to jump up and bring my leg over with relative ease. Wrapping the reins around my hands, I looked behind me as the fighters started to also mount their bipedal dragons. Everyone was now quiet and reserved. A lot of the older guys that I have been with are even starting to look a bit worn out and tired. Me and the older guys have after all been wide awake and through constant life or death battles from the time of last night to now evening. Felix and Wilhelm have both quietly gotten close to me. Wilhelm has a calm expression, but I can guess that he is worried about Crush. Felix on the other hand looks dead serious. Julius and Ricardo and busy getting their guys together. All three of us then just stayed there in silence as everyone else started to gather up behind us. Once all gathered up, I turned around and notified them of our leave. Alright, it's time to head out. As it was now dark, we had to light some lanterns and put them on the saddles of the mounts. This had made the road bright enough for everyone to see and the sky was clear enough to where we could just about make out anything else we needed sight for through the moonlight. We had decided to go down the main roads as that was where I theorized that we would find Crush and the others. Keeping our eyes peeled for anything Crush related, I caught sight of a carriage that had been split in half sitting at the side of the main road, causing me to yell for light. Lanterns. The people who were carrying lanterns then made their way quickly over to my side before lifting up their lanterns. From what I could see, many carriages had either been bisected cleanly in half, with some of them even being completely obliterated. On the ground were many sword cuts ranging from small to large. And in the center of that storm of cuts was an unconscious Crush who was missing an arm. Lady Crush. Seeing her body, Felix had immediately jumped off of his mount in an instant and took a knee near her to check on her condition. Grabbing the wrist of the arm that was still attached, he checked her pulse and sighed in relief before adapting a serious expression and running his healing magic through her. Look for any other survivors. Hearing my command, everyone got off their mounts before going off to search under the remains of the carriages. Wilhelm on the other hand got off his mount before making his way towards Crush and giving off a complicated expression. Looking calmly at everything going on around me, I saw a glint of light drawing my attention to shoot towards it. Seeing what it was, I immediately tapped Patrash, tell her I wanted down. Now off of Patrash, I made my way over towards the source of what made the glint and saw it to be a throwing knife buried inside of a wheel that was torn completely off a carriage. Pulling it out of the wheel, I immediately compared its weight, balance, and sharpness to my knives. And in regards to all those aspects, it was a perfect. It was sharper than my knives, it was more balanced, it was also light but still had a durable metal capable of taking a full power strike without magic from one of my knives without showing so much as a scratch. This is definitely one of the many knives that Roy uses. I guess he missed this one when he was collecting all his other ones. But anyways, I can't wait to show this knife to the old man and see what he can come up with through it. I then walked back to Patrash, who was now laying down, and put the knife in one of the bags present on her saddle. Putting something this sharp in my pocket would just be asking to be cut up bad. Looking back at everyone working tirelessly to find any survivors, I calmly laid down next to Patrash and looked at the stars present in the night sky. Patrash, noticing me laying down beside her, rested her big scaly head on my lap and started to purr. Looking down at the earth dragon, I can't help but let out a small smirk. Definitely like a cat. I then just sat there and admired the stars while thinking about this world. The air here is so much cleaner than Earth. Events that happened on Earth haven't happened here. This world instead has different sayings, a different language, even different races. Different nations, landforms, oceans, and even historical figures. The stars and their constellations are different. This world is also extremely terrifying and dangerous. But with that danger comes a ton of opportunity. These opportunities also include the possibility of becoming immortal. The things I could do back in the other world can never compare to what I can do now. The boring life I had in the past can now be replaced by this new and exciting one. But I'm not naive, I understand fully the danger I am putting myself through by going through with the original plot. But at the time I came to this world, I didn't have the ability to simply increase my memory capability with magic. I didn't have the simple knowledge nor power needed to survive in this world. I simply didn't have what I needed to survive on my own. All I had was knowledge of the original plot, and I abused it as much as possible. And I will continue to abuse it until I am strong enough to live without it. I then felt a weight in my chest pocket and pulled out the Gospel of Sloth. Looking at it immediately made me think of how I killed him so simply. This book could tell Juice his destiny. And I'm actually doing the exact same thing he was by using my knowledge of the events in the original. But Juice, even with this advantage, still lost. This means I have to prepare for canon to go out the window at any moment. I can also lose. The witch's illusion that she put me is a good example of this. My existence of being a different person as compared to the original Mick is bound to have some type of effect of the events surrounding me. The guilty low in the demon beast attack. The witch's illusion and attack on my mind. The many other places and kingdoms. The many unknown enemies that could come from them. All of these are reasons why I can't grow complacent and trust completely in my knowledge of the novel. Hearing some steps in the grass, I see Wilhelm looking down at me. Seeing him, I carefully take Patrash's head off my lap before getting up with a yawn. Have we found everyone? His face was calm as usual, but I could see some form of confusion coming from his eyes. Yes, we have. We definitely found them. But I don't remember most of them being with Lady Crush when she left. Looking over at some conscious people, they seemed to be lost in thought as they looked around. The unconscious ones, however, are never to wake up. Gluttony. I say flatly. This was the work of gluttony. Wilhelm went quiet and frowned deeply. I see. He said in a sad tone. Gluttony's ability was actually known, unlike a lot of archbishops. A strong knight in one of the kingdoms who chased him off had actually fell victim to his left hand and was totally forgotten by everyone around him. He had proven himself to be a knight through the use of his strength, sword techniques that were used by the kingdom, and knowledge of the other knights of the kingdom, and even his best friend, who was a secret weapon for that kingdom at the time. This man was then used as a testimony towards gluttony's ability. And anyone who had suddenly lost their memories in an attack from that point onwards would then be labeled as a victim of gluttony. Wilhelm's voice then spoke with a calm yet bitter tone. Then there is nothing we can do. Hearing him, I looked at him before turning my gaze back towards the conscious survivors. No, we can take them back to the kingdom. Anybody who has lost their memories can slowly be filled in by loved ones and friends. The ones are unconscious though. Wilhelm then brought his gaze upon Crush, who was still unconscious. Felix has to keep her asleep so he can reattach her arm without having to deal with her freaking out or going into shock due to pain. In truth, we can only hope for the best in regards to their situation. 21 comments, 0 vote. Download the app for greater interaction. You can chat with me about my writing experience apart from the comments section. Havengi. Download app now. Childhood crush. Lying on the bed, I looked down to see Rem asleep on my chest. She was also in my tracksuit's jacket. As her nightgown had been ripped by me on the night we had sex, she insisted on wearing this to sleep when we were on our way back to the Karsten household. Lucky for her and mostly me, I wasn't against the idea at all. Last night, I had sent Wilhelm to get the merchants and bring their carriages to pick everyone up. Rem had went with the merchants along with Amelia. So she was with them when they came to pick us up. When I had asked her later that night why she hadn't stayed behind when I was near death, she just looked at me with a soft smile. Call it a woman's intuition, Subaru, but I just knew that you wouldn't die on me. Her tone when saying that was as if it was only the most obvious thing in the world. And I for some odd reason believed. And besides, someone had to complete those plans of yours. After those words from her, I finally felt the drowsiness stemming from my lack of sleep finally take over me. Rem noticed this and had put my head into her lap. She then lulled me to sleep while she played with my hair. Now I find myself with Rem quietly laying on my chest in the bed of my room in Crush's mansion. Brushing my hand through her head, I let out a soft smile. She probably was the one who put me in this bed. Good morning, Subaru, 5 more minutes. Rem said tiredly when she felt my hand going through her hair. Good morning, Rem, it's time to wake up. Groaning, Rem opened her eyes and looked up at me with a pout. Can I please get 5 more minutes? Chucking, I carefully pushed her off my chest and got up. Looking at what I was wearing, I noticed that I was now wearing pajama-type clothing. Did you change me into this, Rem? Yeah, you were asleep after all, dummy. Or were you going to change yourself while unconscious? Plus, I know you wouldn't like it if you woke up in your uniform. Leaning down towards Rem, I gave her a small kiss on the lips before starting to pull away. That was both a thank you and good morning kiss. But when I was about to pull away and look for my uniform, Rem jumped up and planted her lips back onto mine before letting out a giggle. That was the good morning one, the other one can be the thank you. She then pointed towards the desk I had sat down on a few nights before. And Elle left your clothes right there. Your knives are also cleaned and put up also. Going over to my desk, I calmly striped down naked and clothed myself into my butler suit. I also grabbed the 2 knife holders that go on my wrists and put them on underneath my sleeves. And while I was making some final adjustments with my cuffs to make access to my knives easier, I turned back towards Rem, who was also stripping out of my tracksuit to get dressed. Feeling my eyes on her, she looked behind her shoulder and gave me a teasing smile. Like what you see. I then gave her a sly smirk and joked. I'd be careful now. I can only take so much stimulation before going crazy. Rem then chuckled at my joke before throwing a glance towards a certain part of me and biting her lip. I certainly wouldn't mind crazy. Big brother Ferris. Can we play? Well, this is unexpected. Currently in front of me is Lady Crush. And she's playing with toys. Big brother Subaru, how about you? Can you play with me? Looking over at Felix, he just looks dead. Amelia, who is sitting next to me, is on the verge of tears. And Wilhelm is quietly staring out one of the windows of the room. Rem is standing behind me. Crush, I'm afraid I'm too busy to play right now. She then threw me a childish pout which caused Felix to flinch. But I don't blame him though, her current self and the Crush of the past are simply too different. But I want to play now. Crush yelled out. Lady Crush, be quiet. Felix yelled in rage and annoyance, causing her to flinch and put her head down like a kid who was caught stealing one of her teacher's erasers. This response, however, forced Felix to look away as he couldn't look at her anymore without getting sad or angry. But he also probably felt conflicted about yelling at her. Okay. I'm sorry, big bro Ferris. Seeing her head down, I just patted her on the head to reassure this child, and let out a smile. No, it's completely fine. A kid such as yourself wants to play all day. I can completely understand that. But the adults are talking right now, so can you please be a good little girl and let us be alone for a second? Crush, hearing my words, brought her head up before giving me a big goofy smile. Sure. I'll be a good girl just for you, big bro. Smiling at her response, I decided to lead her out of the room with my words. Good girl, now go play outside, will you? Okay. But you're playing with me later, you hear? Me. Crush then jumped off the chair in a childlike manner before running out of the room while giggling. Once the door shut, my face then dropped into a frown before looking towards Felix. He was looking at me with anger. I did after all treat the woman he respected and loved as a child. Calm down, Felix, we both know she shouldn't be here for this conversation. His face then slowly became calm, but I knew that calmness was actually because of anger and sadness. Did you know? He said flatly. No, I had no idea that gluttony would attack. I said before slumping my shoulders and letting tears fall onto the table between us. Drip. I would have at least warned her if I did. Drip. So help me God I would. Drip. But I couldn't. As I cried and let out other words of anguish, I felt Rem softly pull me into her embrace and whisper into my ear. It's okay, Subaru, it wasn't your fault, it wasn't anyone's fault. Her voice then noticeably rose as she looked at Felix. I'd say all fault belongs to gluttony. Hearing Rem, I let out a smile that was covered by my hands as I continued to cry. But after a few minutes of sobbing and complaining about circumstances and those illogical nonsense, I suddenly stopped before adopting a calm look that I normally use. I'm so sorry for that. Felix just looked at me with a dead expression for a good second before sighing and looking out a window. He then spoke in a monotone and dead voice. It's all right, sorry for doubting you. I guess. I just really don't have the ability to care right now. I'm calling the alliance between us off. And don't even try to tell me otherwise. As you can see, Lady Crush is pretty much unfit for being a candidate and we have no reason to work together anymore. You would just cause us more harm than good because of your attention from the witch's cult. And we've already suffered enough losses because of this deal. The white whale's subjection is now pointless to us. I hope you enjoy the credit. He then turned towards Amelia and looked at her with dead eyes. That means you haven't suffered a single loss and have actually taken all of our hard-earned work for yourselves along with Anastasia's party. I do hope you're happy. Witch. And with those final words said, he slowly got up and walked towards the door before swinging it open. But before he was about to step out, he suddenly spoke out. Will you stay? And Wilhelm, who was just silently staring out the window, remained silent. Hearing his silence, Felix let out a sad chuckle. I thought so. He then suddenly turned towards me as tears streamed silently down his face. You can also keep the Earth Dragon, take it as a promise that we never work together again. Have a good life, Subaru. And with those words, the doors finally slammed shut and we found ourselves alone in silence. I however immediately looked over towards Amelia and found her to be especially quiet. She had an almost dead expression as she looked down. Amelia. Tears then started to flood down her cheeks before she let out a whisper. It was my fault, wasn't it? Quickly looking over at Wilhelm, I saw him looking back at me. I then pointed at Amelia with my eyes and he gave me a nod of understanding before silently going out of the door. Looking towards Rem, I see her giving a complicated face of worry towards Amelia. Rem, help me. She then silently nodded towards me before she made her way around the couch and took a seat next to Amelia. We both then wrapped our arms around Amelia and took her into a soft hug. Amelia, feeling our embrace, looked between us in confusion as tears fell down her cheeks. Subaru. Rem. What are you doing? And with tears streaming down her face, she tried her hardest to stop and let out a bright smile only for to time out extremely forced and pained. I'm fine, you too. Seeing her words contradict her expression, I have her a serious expression. Just this once, Amelia. Just this once what? And with soft smiles coming from both me and Rem, I decided to finish what I said. Just this once you can cry. She then went silent for a second. I see. Thank you, Subaru, Rem. You're welcome. The two of us said in sync. Amelia then let out a sad laugh before going quiet. I'm going to cry now. And with that, she started to cry. But me and Rem were both there to console those tears. And with my face looking over her shoulder, I looked through one of the windows present in the room. Upon seeing the sun staring directly at me, I let out a frown as a certain thought came crashing into my head. How very troublesome this is. 30 comments, 0 vote. Today's a good day. Standing in front of Patrash, who is currently hooked up to a carriage, I was rubbing her softly on the head. Say, girl. What do you think about coming along with us? I could definitely use someone like you around. In response to my question, she looked at me in silence before letting out a purr and ramming her head softly into my chest. Stumbling back a bit, I regained my balance before letting out a small laugh. Well, you said it yourself, girl. I put my hand under her chin and started to scratch, earning another purr of pleasure. Looking at her purring from my grooming, I couldn't help but smile unconsciously. I love animals. Well, except for whales though. Rabbits too. And snakes. What's up with the animals of this world? I then felt someone behind me and turned to see Rem standing there in dead silence as she glared at Patrash. Noticing me looking at her, she let out a small cough before calmly speaking. Subaru. Amelia is ready now. Pulling my hand away from Patrash earned a whine from her, I looked over towards Amelia who was silently getting into the carriage. Wilhelm, who is the one driving the carriage, was silently waiting with reins in hand. Rem, can you do me a favor and ride alone with Amelia? I have something I wish to speak of with Wilhelm. Rem looked towards the door of the carriage and let out a sigh before turning back towards me calmly. Okay, I'll help out Amelia. But I better get rewarded later. Her gaze then turned serious. Got it, Subaru. Got it. I said to her with a smirk. Oh, spoil, you plenty. I saw her let out a small smile before finally turning around to enter the carriage. Once she entered, I walked up to the front of the carriage and looked over at Wilhelm. Mind if I sit up here with you? The girls are having a talk. He turned his eyes towards me and laid his gaze on me for a good minute, causing an awkward silence to then form between us. But after the short silence, he just shrugged before turning his head back towards the road. I don't mind it. Hearing his words of confirmation, I jumped up and sat next to him. And once in a comfortable position, I sat still and waited. He then just threw a glance over at me and smirked before flipping the reins to make the carriage move. Feeling the extremely sudden motion, my head flew back and hit the wall behind me, causing a thud. Ow. I sounded out in reflex as I put my hand behind my head, soothed the part that was hit. Seeing me rubbing my head, Wilhelm let out a slight chuckle before going quiet again. Hearing his chuckle, I let out a smirk before letting out a frown towards him. You did that on purpose, didn't you? He just looked at me with one of his eyebrows raised before letting out a snort. He then looked forward again in silence. Well, I guess I should start now. Wilhelm, what do you plan to do from now on? Sporting a frown, Wilhelm just stared off into the distance in silence. You already know what I need to do. Hearing his response, I let out a chuckle. Yeah, I guess I already do. But that's not what I wanted to know. Sighing deeply, Wilhelm spared me one of his eyes. Well, what exactly is it you want to know? Where will you go is the question. Looking at her current state, Crush can no longer fulfill your desire. That means the vow for your loyalty in return for revenge is now completely void. Hearing my words, I saw Wilhelm's face visibly fall at the mention of Crush. However, my mention of his wife sent a glare in my direction and let out a stern yell. How did you know about that? Snorting at his outburst, I looked at him as if he was an idiot. Are you serious? I'm the most knowledgeable person in this world when it comes to the white whale. And its mist clearly erases all memories of 3% it kills. The fact you can even remember your wife means someone ambushed her when battling the white whale. And how did you guys even get information of its location in the first place? Think about, whoever sold it to her was clearly the one who set you guys up. And then the sword demon who was battling beasts for years on end in search of the white whale suddenly declares loyalty out of nowhere. The only reason you searched for the white whale was for the possibility of the person who killed your wife showing up. Wilhelm is now looking at me in visible shock. However, his shock doesn't last long as one of the wheels of the carriage hit a rock, causing us to bounce up. Feeling the bounce, Wilhelm quickly gets the carriage back under control before looking ahead in total silence. His expression then softened in sadness as he let out a quiet whisper filled with desperation and hope. Subaru. Just what is it you want to tell me? I know where she will be. I said flatly. Your wife, that is. My answer just depends on how much you're willing to sacrifice. Hearing my words, he lets out a shaky sigh as if he was barely holding back tears before he spoke to me in a serious tone. I'll sacrifice everything. Hearing this made me then put my hand over my mouth. How about a contract then? A life of total servitude in return for the end of your life's goal. Wilhelm then looked at me in confusion. Can't only spirit arts users and spirits form a contract? And while my hand is still over my mouth, I reach into my suit's collar and pull something from beneath it to reveal a necklace. The necklace has a pitch black stone. Seeing it, Wilhelm lets out a bitter chuckle. So that's your plan, huh? Yes, it is. Now should we go ahead and get this over with, Wilhelm? Sighing, Wilhelm just reached his hand towards me. Seeing it, I release my hand which was over my mouth to reveal a wicked smile and shake his hand while focusing on the spirit inside the necklace. The glow produced by the forming of our contract thankfully led Wilhelm's attention being directed away from my face, giving me enough time to calm it down. With this, Wilhelm van Astria, you belong only to me and nobody else. You shall follow my orders without question or resistance, and in return, I will to tell you where your wife is. And if we don't follow these terms, let us both die horrible and painful deaths. Wilhelm then looked deeply into my eyes before closing them and letting a bitter smile appear on his face. I, Wilhelm van Astria, agree to the contract's terms and penalties. The stone on my necklace then began to shine brighter than before as it sent out two small threads that connected both me and Wilhelm to the spirit inside. When the light finally faded, I felt the spirit inside the stone start laughing as if it had heard the funniest joke in the world. And after its fit of laughter was done, it then started to send me a feeling of admiration. Letting out a smile, I turned away from Wilhelm and brought the necklace off my neck and brought it in front of my face and spoke to both myself and the spirit inside the stone. I think we will get along just fine, me and you. I also wish for us to get along, master. Hearing Wilhelm call me master and mistake the one I was talking to as himself, I just looked over at him with an empty expression. Just Subaru is fine, and for my first set of orders, keep the matters of our contract a secret from everyone. And keep my unpleasant side to yourself. Wilhelm just let out a nod before turning to focus on the road once again. Taking one last glance at the stone, I put the necklace back on and hid it from sight once again. I then looked around and noticed that we had made it out of the kingdom and were currently nearing the tree and giant crater I formed from when we slayed the white whale. Seeing the gigantic crater, I leaned back and put my arms behind my head and proceeded to close my eyes and sat back with a smile of satisfaction. Seems today is going pretty well. 15 comments, 0 vote. Home sweet home. We have arrived, Subaru. Opening my eyes, I saw the doors to the Rosewall mansion to my right. The carriage was parked and Wilhelm, noticing my attention, decided to get off the front of the carriage. He then walked around the carriage before coming to carriage doors and opened them. Lady Amelia, we have arrived. I had also got off my seat and went around only to see Rem being the first to come out with Amelia following behind. Rem, noticing me, sent her eyes towards Amelia before turning back to me and giving a calm nod. Amelia looked to be in a much better mood than when we had left the Crush household and held a smile on her face as she walked to the front of the mansion. But before she got to the door, she turned around on the steps and raised an eyebrow towards us in confusion. Are you guys coming or what? I quickly stepped beside Wilhelm and patted him on the shoulder. I then sent a calm smile towards Amelia. I'm sorry, I have to help Wilhelm with leading Petrash to the stables. But I'll be done in a flash, I swear. Amelia then gave a curt nod towards Wilhelm and I. Okay, have fun you two. She looked over to her left at Rem, who was silently standing beside her. Let's go inside. Watching the two turn and head inside, I turned around and started to work on getting Petrash to the stables. As Petrash and I have a good relationship, it honestly wasn't as hard as it would be for someone else. But the only issue I had with the process was her constant attempts at getting affection. With her constantly throwing me off balance with her head, trying to stand up straight and let her was a pain. Now I could have very well used magic strengthening, but that would simply be wasteful. My magic capacity may have been upgraded, but I still need to value it. With my capacity being larger, I have no idea how long it will take to refill. Someone like Rosewall needs a couple days to refill himself to full. And with my gate's mana constantly growing in purity, density, and size, I have to use more time to make the gaseous mana in the atmosphere into droplets of mana. And after finally managing to lead Petrash into the stables, I put my hand on her head and left her one last goodbye rub. I'll be back soon, don't worry. Wilhelm, who was beside me the whole time, just silently followed me out of the stables and up to the front of the mansion. Once on the steps, however, I stopped and looked over towards him. So, are you going to go back? Hearing me, Wilhelm stopped and replied in a calm and collected manner. No, I won't, I already said I would leave, so when or how I do it doesn't matter. It would only be delaying the inevitable. He then grabbed the handle of the door to the mansion and opened it for me to go through. And besides, you already have what I need. Why would I leave when I can finally get it? Making our way inside, I made my way through the familiar halls of the mansion before coming onto a certain room. In truth, I had just used my mana to strengthen my nose. I am after all familiar with Rem's scent, so it works out just fine for whenever I need to find her. Opening the door, I was met by a flash of light. Seeing it, my perception of time was unconsciously strengthened and I made it out to be a fist. Reinforcing my body, I take advantage of my perception and turn my body to where it would miss before resuming my normal perception. The fist then misses me before I quickly use my reinforced body to go around the attacker and bring my arms beneath their own and lock my hands together tightly behind their head. Once I successfully locked them in place, I let only my upper body be reinforced to save mana and took a good look at my attacker. Noticing her blonde hair and maid outfit, I immediately identified her as Frederica and proceeded to look around for Rem and Amelia. I found Amelia sitting down and staring at the two of us in surprise, but Rem, who was sitting beside her, was calmly drinking tea. Frederica had probably made some tea while Wilhelm and I were busy with Petrash. And sitting on another chair was two children I was familiar with, Arthur and Petra. Amelia, Rem, did you forget to tell her about me? Amelia just looked at me and then looked towards Frederica, who was silently trying to force her way out of my hold. She then looked down at her cup before sighing and taking a sip from it to calm herself. He's all right, Frederica, he was the one I told you about. You know, the one who killed both Sloth and the white whale. Frederica, who was struggling in my hold, then suddenly stopped at Amelia's words before sighing in defeat. Please let me go. Smiling, I let go of my hold on her before calmly stepping a couple steps back as she turned around with a guilty frown and took a low bow. I apologize for attacking you, I just smelt something bad and attacked you out of reflex. Seeing her lower her head, I reached out my hand towards her. Don't apologize, you simply acted on your duty to both serve and protect this mansion. That's something I can't get mad at. Raising her head, she scanned my face for a couple seconds with her gaze before letting out a smile of her own that showcased all of her sharp fangs and grasped my outstretched hand to pull herself up. The name's Frederica, it's a pleasure to meet you, Subaru. Amelia has just told me about the many wonderful things you have done. Letting out a laugh, I proceeded to put my hand behind my head in embarrassment. Oh please, I haven't done anything worth praise. I just did what I considered good and that's all. Frederica let out a smirk of amusement before letting go of my hand and pointing towards a seat in between Arthur and Petra. Okay then, mister, I can't take a compliment, you can go ahead and sit down in between those two as I continue my conversation with Lady Amelia. She then turned towards Wilhelm, who was standing silently in the doorway. Why don't you come stand inside for now also? Ignoring the nickname she suddenly gave me, I walked over towards Arthur and Petra before calmly sitting between them. Looking at the both of them, I noticed Petra was looking at me with shining eyes while Arthur was holding a complicated expression. Noticing their eyes, I moved my gaze in between the both of them in confusion. Do I have something on my face? Hearing my question, Petra and Arthur both moved their faces extremely close to mine before yelling out loud. You're so cool, Subaru. Tell me how you got so strong. Feeling a headache appear from their noise, I patted Petra on the head with a smile before turning towards Arthur. I'll tell you how I did so later. Petra then went silent under my constant assault of head pats and Arthur leaned back and closed his eyes as a look of acceptance formed across his face. Wilhelm, who was in the doorway, just walked across the room and stood behind me in silence. Frederica, noticing this, sent a look of interest between Wilhelm and Elle before sitting down and filling herself a cup of tea. Once done filling her cup, she took a sip from it before placing it on a saucer, making an audible clink resound across the room. She then put her hand to her mouth and let out a slight cough before looking up at Amelia with a serious expression. Now to continue where I left off. 10 comments, 0 vote. Beatrice. Walking out of the doors of the room, I let out a yawn of boredom as I thought back on the conversation between Amelia and Frederica. All they pretty much did was catch up on certain things with each other before speaking a bit on the topic of the sanctuary. Frederica has also complained a bit about how being the only maid in this mansion at the time of our leave was miserable. But to my surprise, a development I didn't expect to happen occurred. Petra had come to apply to be a maid, but that's not the thing that surprised me. Arthur will to become a butler was the thing that shocked me. Petra had applied mostly because of my actions in saving the village from the witch cult and also the kids from when the demon beasts attacked. Arthur, on the other hand, had told me that he would forever keep a bad taste in his mouth if he didn't return the favor. Walking along the halls, I reach into my front pocket and feel for the gospel that is present inside it. When I touched it and confirmed its existence, I looked over to my right and felt a small connection with the door. Letting out a small smile at this door, I looked behind my shoulder at Wilhelm. Stay here, I have something to do. Wilhelm only nodded in response before leaning on one of the walls present in the hallway and closed his eyes. Turning towards the door, I reached my hand out before opening it to enter. Once inside, I smelled the familiar scent of books and the sight of the forbidden library. Just how do you do it? Beatrice's voice rang out from in front of me, causing my gaze to drop to look at her. Your ability to find me so easily really ticks me off, you know. Laughing a bit, I send her a small knowing smile. I don't know how I do it, but maybe I have a knack for it. Or, something, is allowing me to find you easily. Frowning a bit at the last part of my talk, she let out a small HMPH before looking up at me with a frown. Well, I guess we have done enough talking for now. Now what did you come here for? For now. I said in fake shock as I reached into my front pocket before letting out a smile. Don't worry, Biko, I'll make sure you don't go lonely. Don't call me Biak. She began with a deep frown before I pulled out the gospel, causing her to go quiet. Why do you have that? I killed the Archbishop of Sloth, Patelgus. All I ask for is for you to tell me the origin of the Gospels and how I can destroy them. I said with a blank expression as I passed the Gospel to her. Beatrice sighed sadly as she flipped through its blank pages and confirmed it to be the Gospel of a dead person. So. You left me too, guys. After saying that, she handed it over to me before looking up at me with caution. Correct me if I'm wrong, Subaru, but did you say you wanted to destroy the Gospels? I looked at the Gospel for a second before proceeding to pocket it and looked at Beatrice. Yes, I plan to destroy every single one of them. The fakes, however, are something I don't need to bother with. Beatrice visibly flinched when I hinted at my knowledge on the true Gospels before looking up at me with caution and a slight bit of hope. Subaru, what is your actual reason for coming here? Could you perhaps be them? Beatrice then looked directly at me with wide eyes of shock and whispered in disbelief. You're them. Getting on a knee, I looked her directly in the eyes in silence. Beatrice looked directly back as hope slowly filled her eyes before a slight uncertainty appeared. Please. Answer me, Subaru. Silence. Answer me. And with her eyes now producing countless amounts of tears as they were full of a mixture of hope, uncertainty, and sadness, I just looked her directly in her eyes. To be totally honest with you, Beatrice, the first find you pitiful. Shocked, Beatrice looked up at me as her tears stopped and her eyes widened in fear. What? Don't tell me you're not. You spent 400 years blindly following someone's orders and never, truly, understood what they meant. You spent countless days on end looking at a blank book. Countless days of reading, learning, and perfecting your magic, all for what? Stop. There is no them, and there never was. You can open that book one more time to drill that fact into your thick skull and maybe also learn what reality is while you're at it. Please. And your strong front is nothing but a sham, Biko, it's just something to help you cope with your cowardly side. The same cowardly side that keeps you locked up in this false contract and also prevents you from killing yourself or attempting at least some form of change. Stop. She yelled with her head now facing directly towards the ground and her bangs covering her eyes, droplets of tears were rapidly hitting the floor. She then slowly raised her head and showed an extremely pure type of sadness inside her eyes with surprisingly no signs of anger. She didn't even have any signs of her cope mechanism, which was her unbridled stubbornness. I'm a coward, I've always known it. But what do I have left? Mother is dead, teacher is dead, Geis left me, all I have left is this library. So tell me. Why should I leave when I have absolutely nothing left? Sighing, I proceeded to sit down and pat the ground next to me. Sit down and I'll tell you. How does sitting down help? Sending her a glare, I patted the ground again. Do you want a good reason to leave your misery or not? Shutting up, she sat down beside me uncomfortably before turning her head towards me. Now what? Now I'll ask you one question, and one question only. How you answer will affect you from this point onwards, okay? Looking at her for her response, she just nodded silently. Smiling, I got up before going to the doors of the library and opening them. Wait, don't leave, Subaru. Beatrice yelled out in panic as she got up and quickly ran towards the door. She then grabbed onto my pant leg and held it with her small hands as she looked down. Don't leave me like Mama did. If you don't want me to leave, then come with me. I said calmly as I held the door open. That's my question for you, Beatrice. Will you come with me for just this once? Tightening her hold on my pant leg, she looked up at me with a pained expression filled with a battle of uncertainty and hope. Aye. Seeing her hesitation, I reached towards the small and petite hand that was on my leg and softly held it with my own. Feeling her hand held by my own, she looked down at it in silence before looking up at me with her usual expression, except this time it held a small smile. Yes. And with her yes, she let go of my hand and took a few steps out of the library before looking back towards me with a bright smile present on her face. Thank you, Subaru. You are not that disgusting and revolting personality-wise, I suppose. Laughing lightly at her joke, I walked out of the library and gave a secretive thumbs up behind my back to Wilhelm as he stood watching the interaction between us. Well, Beatrice, let's go meet the others. Petra will be happy to see you. Shivering at the mention of Petra, she turned towards the now closed door and went to go back inside. Seeing her breakdown at the mention of Petra, I just sighed before grabbing her and slinging her over my shoulder and walking towards through the halls. Please let me down. Beatrice said softly, only to earn a retort from me. To think you waited 400 years to be taken out of that library only to have your will shatters because a 12-year-old. Oh, what a tragic tale that would be. One of the great spirits being beaten by a child. That would be pitiful, I suppose. Beatrice said softly to herself before going silent again. You can let me go now. Sure, but you'll have to hold my hand so I don't lose you. I said as I put her in front of me and reached out my hand. Looking up at my hand, she frowned before looking at me with agitation. What am I? A child to you? All she got from me in response was a silent smile, causing her to sigh deeply before grabbing my hand and then started to mumble under her breath as we walked. Stupid Subaru. 17 comments, 0 vote. Everything is starting to move. Walking outside of the mansion's main doors with Wilhelm and Beatrice, I see Frederica and Rem by a carriage talking to a familiar face. Well, I'm not too familiar to him, yet. On the front carriage is the green-robed man that goes by the name of Otto Suen. I personally asked him to be the one to take us to the sanctuary. Luckily, he agreed to my request and is now here at the Rosewall mansion. Slowly making our way over, I noticed that they seemed to finish whatever they were talking about as Frederica turned around and started to walk towards us. Rem, however, immediately turned and went inside of the carriage to where I assume Amelia to be silently waiting. Frederica just walked calmly over towards us before showing an intrigued expression as she saw Beatrice next to me. Beatrice. Beatrice, who was currently holding my hand, let out a HMPH towards Frederica's shock before looking up at her with a frown. Yes, what is it? I believe I have enough time to talk with you for a bit, I suppose. Frederica, however, just looked at her for a few seconds before noticing our hands locked together and looked at me with a lot of questions present inside her eyes. But as I could probably guess like 90% of those questions, I just let out a nod before secretly pointing towards the carriage with my left. I see, thank you, Subaru. Frederica said as a look of understanding appeared on her face. She then took a soft smile as she looked towards Beatrice. Have a good trip, Beatrice. I hope to see you out and about more in the future. Beatrice, hearing her, let go of my hand to cross her arms over her chest. What do you mean by more? I think I am and will be doing perfectly fine with that. Frederica, seeing the small smile that betrayed the lowly Baba's words, let out a giggle before turning back towards me with a smile. Take good care of her, Subaru. Beatrice is a really nice girl deep inside after all. Letting out a soft smile and chuckled as I proceeded to pat Beatrice on the head. Don't worry about Beatrice, she's going to be just fine with me around to protect her. Feeling my hand on top of her head, the lowly Baba smacked it away before looking at me with a smirk. Protect me how? Last time I checked, I was in fact the stronger one. She then looked towards Frederica. So going by that logic, wouldn't that make me the one who is protecting Subaru? Putting her hand up to her mouth and letting out another giggle, Frederica looked between us one last time before starting to walk towards the front doors of the mansion. Beatrice, seeing her suddenly leave, let out a frown before speaking in an annoyed tone. Aren't you going to answer my question? Hearing her, Frederica just turned around on the steps and looked down at Beatrice with a smile. Beatrice is wrong and Subaru is wrong. But you're both also right. To make it clear, both of you will probably protect each other's backs. And with that, she looked towards me and mouthed a thank you before going inside of the mansion. Watching her go back inside, I looked towards the carriage before going to open it to check on both Rem and Amelia. Looking inside the now open door of the carriage, I noticed Amelia talking to Petra happily. And as Amelia was technically a 14-year-old mentally, they seemed to be enjoying themselves very much. That's a very nice thing to say, Petra, but I can't say I am pretty. Rem was sitting next to them in silence and was looking at the two with a soft smile present on her face. But it's true. You are pret. Subaru. Finally noticing me, Petra looked at me in confusion before letting out a smile and jumping off of Amelia's and straight into me. Hey, wait a second. Ah. Making me fall backwards, I landed roughly on my back as Petra bumped her head into my chest. Petra then rubbed her forehead a bit before sitting up and looking down at me with a smile. Subaru. Letting out a groan from the impact on my back, I looked up at her and sighed before patting her on the head. Feeling my hand on her head, she let out a bright and toothy smile before grabbing it. Feeling her grab my arm and not let go, I looked up at her in confusion. What is it now, Petra? 1 second. She said to me as she unwrapped a piece of cloth off of her wrist before tying it onto mine. She then proceeded to play with the cuffs of my suit before smiling satisfaction and getting off. There. Now Subaru will have safe travels. Looking at my cuff, I feel at the price of cloth under it before letting out a smile. It seems I managed to get this treasure. Thank you, Petra. Getting up, I wiped the dust off the back of my cloths before looking around. And as I looked around, I noticed a small and familiar figure trying to sneak towards the doors of the mansion. Following my gaze, Petra also noticed Beatrice and proceeded to run towards the lowly Baba. Betty. Let's go try out some clothes again. Betty. Let's go try out some clothes again. Beatrice, hearing Petra, froze up at the familiarity of the little girl's voice and turned around in panic and started to whisper in fear. And no, anything but that. Sighing at Beatrice's fear of Petra, I used a bit of mana in my legs to make a quick burst to catch up to Petra and easily picked her by the neck. Petra, I'm afraid you can't play with Beatrice today. She is going on a trip with me and needs to have enough energy to make her way through it. Putting her down, she looked up at me with a sad smile before nodding and turning towards Beatrice. I'm sorry, Betty, it seems we won't be playing today. Enjoy your trip. Beatrice, hearing her, visibly regained all of her life force as she shot straight up and looked towards me with a bright smile. Seeing her smile and Petra being sad, I decided to tease her a bit as I let out a demonic smirk towards Beatrice, causing her to freeze and then pat Petra on the head. Well, you can't play with her today, but you can definitely have plenty of time to play with her tomorrow and the day after that. Petra then turned around and looked up at me with a look of mesmerization. Really? I can do that. Laughing, I gave her a smile and threw a thumbs up towards her. Yes, you certainly can. Anything is possible in youth. Shine. Seeing something behind me, Petra put her hands in front of her face before blinking in confusion. She then looked at it properly before wiping her eyes to make sure it's real. Is that a sunset? What sunset? I said in confusion as I looked behind me only to find nothing but a carriage. I even looked up into the sky and saw the sun to be nearing only the center. Huh, probably nothing. Petra said before suddenly giving both me and Beatrice a hug before turning and skipping up the steps of the mansion. And when she got near the doors of the mansion, she stopped her skips before waving towards us with a childish smile. Bye, Beatrice, bye, Subaru. Beatrice, who was next to me, sighed in relief and was about to turn to berate me but instead felt my hand giving her a head pat. Feeling it, she didn't whack right but instead chose to close her eyes and accept it before letting out a HMPH and going inside the carriage. I'll forgive you for now. But I'm definitely going to get you back later. Letting out a soft smile, I looked towards Amelia and Rem, who witnessed the whole ordeal and pointed towards the front of the carriage. I'm going to be up front with the merchant. Please do me a favor and keep Beatrice busy. Amelia and Rem just looked towards the two of us in confusion. This, however, only caused me to laugh as I closed the door of the carriage softly and turned towards Wilhelm with an expressionless face. Sir, you seem different compared to when you were around them. Is there perhaps a reason why? Sighing, I put up my finger to shut him up and pointed the other towards the front of the carriage before looking at him with a serious expression. I'll talk with you about this on a later date. But now is not at all a good time for this, do you understand? I understand. Wilhelm said calmly. I assume you want me to watch over the mansion like you asked me to. Yes, but also pay close attention to the Arthur kid. He's got a knack for the sword and is young. If he meets your requirements, take him under your wing and teach him a bit after your job is done. Also remember capture the target if possible. If it's not possible, simply kill them. Wilhelm then took a bow. Understood, sir, I'll keep it in mind. He then raised himself up and asked. May I now take my leave? Yes, you may. And with my confirmation, Wilhelm turned around went back inside of the mansion. With him here, I'm completely sure that the mansion should be safe from its attack. And even if the organization that Elsa is from decides to send a big shot, I'm confident in Wilhelm's ability to handle it. Checking my wrist, I let out a smile before walking towards the front of the carriage and hopping directly into the seat next to Otto. Whoa. Mr. Subaru. What are you doing up here with me? Surprised from my sudden appearance, Otto about fell off the whole carriage but luckily caught himself before doing so. He then straightened himself into a sitting position but was still a bit tense from what I could see. Don't tell me I'm in trouble now. And noticing how tense he was, I patted him on the shoulder a bit before leaning back to relax. No need to be so tense around me, Otto. Wait. That is your name, right? And don't worry, you're not in trouble at all. Singing in relief, Otto looked at me for a bit in silence before making a suspicious frown. Yeah, that my name all right. But how do you know my name? And why am I even here in the first place? Hearing him, I leaned back and started to laugh before sending him one of my eyes while smirking. Well, to be honest about it, I about died laughing when I heard about an unfortunate merchant being mistaken as a witch cultist and decided to hire you for my amusement. Flinching back in pain, Otto grasped his chest before leaning forward as tears streamed down his now closed eyes. I see. That is good to know. Patting him on the shoulder, I leaned down towards his ear and started to whisper. There little Otto, the big bad bully cultists won't hurt you or steal your lunch money anymore. Hearing me, he started to leak even more tears before calming down after a few moments. Now collected, he put on a stout expression which fit his handsome looks, causing me to whistle. Maybe you would have a woman by now and not be kidnapped by cultists if you kept that expression up a bit more, little Otto. Visibly getting hurt by my words, Otto leaned forward as if someone had punched in the gut and spoke in a very forced tone. You're a very cruel man, Subaru. 16 comments, 0 vote.